Okay, if I could have your attention, please. I would like to introduce tonight's speaker. My name is Craig Thurtell, and Lisa DiMartino has asked me to introduce Dick Hull tonight.
Volume?
Is this better? Okay. But I was asked, first of all, to alert you all that there's a sign-up sheet at the table up there, and you're all encouraged to sign it for more information. And before I introduce Richard Hull, I just want to make one comment. I'd like to thank Lisa DiMartino for her dynamism and determination in making this event actually occur. And so I think we all should give her a hand. And that brings me to tonight's speaker, Richard Hull. It occurred to me that it's not all that common when historical scholarship intersects a topic of local and contemporary interest. And Dick Hull is uniquely equipped to make the most of this intersection. An abbreviated account of his rich professional experience on which this talk tonight will be grounded would include the following, or at least I'm including the following. He is a professor of history. He just told me he's been teaching history at New York University for 48 years. And he has been a Fulbright scholar. He is the author of 12 books, including a book, most of these books are on African history, including Jews and Judaism in African history. In addition to these formidable accomplishments, he has found time to take a scholarly interest in Orange County. He is the official historian of the town of Warwick, and he is currently completing research on Jews and Judaism in Orange County. So let's welcome Dick Hull.
Fellow historian Craig, I thank you very much for the very kind words and the introduction. Gee, I almost feel like maybe I lived in Cornwall at some time. I see so many familiar faces here, and that's always nice. I always come into talks like this with a little bit of trepidation if I feel that the audience is totally new to me. But it is nice to see old friends and acquaintances here. This is a subject, I'm not representing any group. I am only really representing, if anyone, I suppose, the town of Warwick as municipal historian. But I've always been interested in the culture of Judaism. I'm not Jewish myself, but it's a very rich culture, and most of my writing has been on Jews in Africa when looking at Jews and Judaism. But I have also been very interested in the Satmar community since they first came to Orange County back in 1972. And I've been following them ever since, off and on through the years, and occasionally will lecture on the Satmars. And when a group of concerned citizens over here asked if I would come over and share some of my information, knowledge on them, I thought, sure, why not? And so I'm here to discuss with you, hopefully in a very straightforward, not a polemical way, a subject that I know is a sensitive one. It can be charged with a lot of emotion and feeling on the part of people throughout Orange County right now, but I will try to make this as straightforward and as forthright as I can, and we'll have a short period of question and answer that will follow this. I don't know how long this is going to take me because this is the first time that I've actually structured my talk in the way that I'm doing tonight. So I will try to go from about 7, it's 5 after 7 now, to about 20 after 8 or so, just to give you an idea of time frame, and then we'll have a question and answer period following that. Okay, well, so I would like to thank those who have invited me and who have made all the arrangements for this evening's event. The title of my talk tonight is A Village Apart in Orange County, History of the Hasidic People of Kiryas Joel. The village of Kiryas Joel, or KJ, is a vibrant and increasingly important part of our county, and its explosive growth and widening political influence and prominence have begun to impact not only our county and its municipalities, but the state as well. KJ's problems have become our problems, and their solutions have tested many long-established legal frameworks. Since its founding in 1974, it has engaged surrounding villages, towns, counties, the state, and the federal government in extensive, costly, and time-consuming litigation in its efforts to grow as a community. This has resulted, as you know, I don't think I have to tell you, it's resulted in rising tension and acrimony on all sides. It can be argued that KJ and its neighbors are on a collision course, and one that could lead to strife on everyone's part. I believe it is time for the Satmars and their neighbors to begin a frank and open dialogue on how to work out these issues to the satisfaction of everyone concerned, and that this cannot be accomplished without an understanding of each other's culture. As a professional historian, I always like to begin my research on contemporary issues and then work back into the past, into their roots, in order to contextualize them and thus, hopefully, to better understand them. Kiryas Joel is one of our newest enclave communities, yet one of our least understood, even though much credit must go to the Times-Herald Record reporter Chris McKenna, who has been an acute observer and chronicler of the community's growth for well over a decade. And while we may know something of the problems facing KJ and its often troubled relationship with its neighbors, we know little of its pioneering founders, their origins, and the vision and the ethos that has driven them. An official publication of Kiryas Joel of 1999 proclaimed that they are, and I quote, "a unique community without parallel anywhere in the United States, where traditional values and the centrality of family are still the guiding principles of community life," close quote. Now, you may have difficulty finding this mystical, I should say, village, as there are, strangely enough, no directional highway signs on any of the public highways, no postal zip code despite its large population. Nevertheless, this enigmatic community dwells within the very heart of Orange County, and it is our responsibility as citizens to recognize its existence and to find out more about these people who have come into our midst. So I will move on now to the topic of visiting the community and alternate lifestyle. For Orange County locals, a visit to Kiryas Joel is like a visit to another world. It's like going into an eerie time warp. Yiddish is their language, and their dress makes them look like people out of an 18th century Central European shtetl or village. Bowing to modesty and simplicity and to achieve conformity of appearance, yet distinctiveness as a separate people, men, mostly with beards, wear wide-brimmed fur hats over their curled, dangling, tasseled earlocks. White shirts and long black topcoats that extend almost to their ankles resemble Middle Eastern kaftans. Married women have shorn heads covered by wigs and scarves or kerchiefs. Arms are draped in long-sleeved shirts. Their skirts or dresses extend below their knees, and their legs are sheathed with high, heavy woolen stockings. The bland look-alike architecture of high-density, multi-family structures resembles what I saw in East Germany in the early 1960s, with little attention given to aesthetics, but much to pure functionality. Physically, this may not be a gated community like Tuxedo Park, but its boundaries are nevertheless sharply defined by religion and culture. You truly feel as if you'd entered another world, far removed from the bucolic Hudson Valley. This is a deeply religious municipality. composed almost exclusively of ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews of the Satmar court or sect, which I'll explain a little later. Hasidism means devout piety, and since antiquity, Hasid was the name given by Jews to those whom they considered to be pious ones. Hasidism is a strain of religious fundamentalism that arose around 200 BCE. The movement lost its identity when Jews of the Middle East were driven into exile, and it did not reappear until the 17th century. Fervently and passionately, the Hasids maintain an alternate lifestyle and religio-cultural values in the face of perceived and much feared acculturative and secularizing trends lurking just outside their boundaries. The Satmar, as one of the most conservative of the several Hasidic branches, are obsessed with the need to protect and to preserve their identity as they adhere to strict rules of conduct that constrain their dealings with outsiders. Indeed, their lives are circumscribed by the 613 mitzvos, or commandments, which according to rabbinical tradition are found in the Hebrew Bible and are elaborated upon in the oral law and in ancient mystical traditions, including medieval Kabbalism. Stringently observing religious texts, the Hasids adhered to a broad range of restrictions, including those on foods and their preparation, on clothing fabrics and styles, on the separation of male and female activities, including, of course, education and religious observance, and the use of certain modern mechanical devices like cars and electrical appliances on the Shabbos or holy day. At all times, recreational use of the internet, of television, and radio is actively discouraged by the village leadership. Moreover, on holy days like Saturday, people must walk, and they design their communities so that everything, especially the synagogue, is a short distance from their homes. Women are strongly discouraged from driving at any time, and this can limit their mobility, both geographically and, of course, occupationally. The Satmar tend not to socialize with non-Hasids, and they try to live apart from secular Jews, including the mainstream Orthodox. The Satmar, as religious fundamentalists, see themselves as defenders of the Jewish faith in a world which, in their mind, is characterized by a declining number of Jews who define themselves through religious practice. Nearly anything or any group that encourages acculturation or cultural assimilation or even devotion or deviation, I should say, within Hasidism from the authority of the community's Rebbe and which might threaten their own belief systems is viewed with deep suspicion. Dissidents within the community are often ostracized and harassed. Occasionally, a dissident might be banished, a fate that can be extremely traumatic to the victim. Relatively speaking, communication with outsiders is limited and tends to be formal and businesslike at best. Nevertheless, the Satmar can be accommodating to outsiders if it will advance their own interests. For over half a century, the Satmar have been officially anti-Zionist. Most of them consider the state of Israel to be illegal, arguing that it should not be created until the Messiah returns and sanctions it. This anti-Israeli stance has complicated the relations with mainstream Jews. In America, even within the ranks of other so-called courts or extended family communities of Hasidism. The Satmar can be surprisingly charitable toward their own, but unlike other courts of Hasidism, such as the almost evangelical Lubavitchers, their altruism seldom leaves their own court. In this essentially, fundamentally patriarchal theocracy, each court, such as the one in Kiryas is bound to a particular male rebbe, whose authority must not be questioned. The Rebbe can call upon his people to vote for a particular candidate for office, and most of his followers will accept his dictates without question. Thus, the Rebbe wields immense political power within his community and over non-Satmar communities lying within the same political district or constituency. The Satmar, as I've said, are deeply religious, and it's not surprising that they maintain the largest religious school system in Orange County, educating well over 5,500 students in numerous Talmudic yeshivas, or schools. Overseeing most of this system is the all-powerful United Talmudic Academy, known as the UTA, which is the recipient of public and private largesse. In this Orange County village in the heart of America, nearly every adult prays in Hebrew and converses in Yiddish. I now move on to the mystical foundations of the new Hasidism. Today, Hasidism, like so many Christian and Muslim religious fundamentalist movements or sects, is rapidly expanding, numerically and globally. The Satmars numbered a few dozen when they came to America after World War II. Today, some claim they have an estimated 135,000 adherents worldwide, stretching from here all the way out to Australia. Though the figures are guesstimates, most of them live in the United States. In Orange County, Satmar Hasidism is certainly by far the fastest growing religious movement. To understand this fascinating phenomenon, we need to examine its origins in Eastern Europe. The revival of Hasidism was begun in the 1740s by an impoverished, charismatic mystic by the name of Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, or Besht, B-E-S-H-T for short. The Besht, which is actually an acronym, acquired the meaning the master of the good name. This individual claimed to have had a mystical experience with the Messiah in Podolia, a small region in present-day Ukraine near the Polish-Hungarian borderlands. Fired by this revelation, he began to travel to many villages, dispensing wisdom. The Besht left no writings, interestingly, no writings. His person and teachings, though, are embedded in legends which were recorded generations after his death. It should be noted here that many rabbis at the time were deeply imbued with a mystical philosophy called Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the study of how to receive fulfillment in life, how to make sense of one's life and of one's personal role in the world. This nuanced and deeply complicated philosophy was focused on a number of spiritual texts, perhaps most importantly, the Book of Splendor, or the Zohar. Embedded in these words were a series of ancient revelations, some going back thousands of years. By 1700, Kabbalah study in Eastern and Central Europe had become, for many rabbis, as important as the study of the basic Talmudic texts. Lurianic Kabbalism is grounded in the redemptive notion that the Jewish people exist in order to prepare the world for the arrival of the Messiah. The Besht and his followers of rabbinic mystics were influenced by this esoteric philosophy, but broke with its custom of praying in exclusive circles dominated by a perceived aristocracy of religious intellectuals. Instead, they espoused a popular version consisting of dancing, singing, and praying out loud. They believe that a person's quest for nearness to God can be realized through holy ecstasy, an ecstasy which can only be achieved in fervent prayer directly to God. In other words, devotion to God comes from the emotions, not from academic knowledge. The Besht, having never authored a book, insisted that perfection can be achieved largely through personal piety and faith. The seemingly anti-intellectual approach was very appealing to the poorly educated, untutored masses of 18th century Central Europe. Professor Rita Botwinick has noted that to the Hasids, quote, "The presence of God is everywhere in the universe, and one may communicate with God anywhere at any time." Close quote. You don't need a formal education, in other words, to draw near to God in their minds. In a part of the world that was in great religious ferment and socio-political upheaval, this revivalist movement, comparable perhaps to the Christian revivalist movements which were at the same time sweeping across the continent, spread like a brush fire among the common people. The Besht and his followers rejected all secularizing tendencies in mainstream Judaism, especially those emanating from the Enlightenment in Western Europe, with its emphasis on seemingly iconoclastic scientific inquiry. Yet they also saw themselves as an alternative to traditional rabbinical practices that seemed to be losing their salience with the local rural populations of impoverished Eastern Europe. As Jacob Marcus notes, quote, "Hasidism was not a revolt against the Jewish religion, but against its leaders and their interpretation of it," close quote. Some scholars argue that by the time of the Besht's death in 1760, Hasidism had become a populist mass movement embraced by many thousands of Jews in what is today central Poland. The highest Hasidic ideal was devikut, which was achieved through communion or attachment to God. The Besht formulated a greatly simplified procedure for reaching devikut, one that was within everyone's reach, the poor as well as the rich, the merchant as well as the peasant. Hasidism radically democratized Jewish worship by legitimizing non-scholarly forms of communion and upgrading them in importance to the level of formal Torah study. The Besht was succeeded by Rabbi Dov Bayer, who died in 1773. I don't have his birth date, and R. Jacob Joseph. And these people systematized, and further elaborated upon the ideas of the Besht and attracted a huge following. By the 1830s, Hasidism had spread to Jews throughout Central and Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, and even Lithuania. Most Hasidic communities were poor, though their movement received the patronage, and this is interesting, of wealthy merchants. We'll get into that later. Many mainstream Orthodox Jews, especially the rabbinical scholars, saw Hasidism as a threat. Professor Hilary Rubenstein writes that, quote, "They condemn the Hasidic view that God is present in all things as heretical and deplored the contention that it was possible to worship him through bodily acts," close quote. A rich anti-Hasidic literature began to develop, and mainstream Jews sought to suppress the movement, but only with limited success. The scholar Glenn Diner explains that, quote, "In the long run, the Hasids' spiritual revival and social revolution would prove conservative enough to avert a permanent schism," close quote. Nevertheless, by the mid-19th century, great Hasidic family dynasties had begun to emerge, to set up their own courts, ruled like absolute monarchs, and sometimes competed with each other for members. Many of them became adroit populists who proved remarkably adept at garnering elite patronage, neutralizing powerful opponents, and methodically co-opting mainstream Jewish leaders and institutions. Still, faced with continual suppression and persecution from non-Hasidic Jews as well as from Christians, the Hasids began to separate themselves from the established Jewish communities and their prayer houses and turn increasingly to mystical formulations of ritual and belief. In self-righteous defense, they came to believe that they alone were the true and perhaps only chosen people of God. They began to practice exclusivity and set themselves apart socially, legally, and economically from what they feared as the creeping secularization and the anomaly of wider society. Almost paradoxically, they criticized the modernization of Jewish life, yet embraced modern technologies if they served to reinforce the purity of Judaism as a religion. Through contemplative prayer and daily intensive Talmudic studies, they became fiercely prideful and began to develop an elite collective consciousness. Outsiders regarded them as arrogant and self-righteous. Egalitarian in spirit, they dressed plainly and uniformly, making it difficult to distinguish between the various economic classes within their society, yet making them stand out vis-a-vis everyone else. Thus, while they worked to remain homogeneous within their own insular communities, they endeavored to be viewed as different to outsiders. By the early 19th century, the Hasids had established their own villages among the predominant mainstream Jewish and Roman Catholic communities. It's interesting to note that up until that time, most of the Jews were living in these small shtetls on the estates of various really feudal landlords. But the successors to the Basht began to argue that, no, we need to set up our own communities outside of these feudal estates. And so that's why you begin to see, from the 1830s onward, the Hasids setting up their own communities where they could have their own forms of government and conduct their affairs according to their own traditions and beliefs. Now, these communities began to spring up everywhere in Central Europe, causing alarm among the local populations. And in an attempt to contain their spread, restrictions were placed on their economic and social activities. As Jerome Mintz, the famous Judaic historian, in his work Hasidic People writes, and I quote, "Like most populations coping with a seemingly oppressive government, the Jews developed a subsystem of practices to work their way around official statutes." He added, quote, "Secular law in their minds could be changed, could be argued, could be protested, could be ignored, and even broken with impunity if it conflicted with their religious law." And I think that's important to remember. Thus, the Hasidic leadership did not hesitate to violate local laws if they were seen as being antithetical to their interpretation of the Torah, or if the secular laws had no sanction in Scripture. And to get around these restrictions, they developed collaborative relationships with the key political power brokers, both Gentile as well as Jewish. They became remarkably adept at securing elite patronage, neutralizing powerful opponents, and methodically challenging through judicial litigation in time-honored political processes. These practices were seen as a threat to the local populations, and they had the effect of generating frustration and tension that ultimately led to a vicious anti-Semitism among the non-Jewish populations. Still, many among the non-Jewish elites pledged to protect and advance the interests of these communities and use the Hasidic leadership as a counterbalance to the powerful Roman Catholic religious hierarchy in various communities where Hasids were living, or beyond the communities themselves, but in the various regions, perhaps I should say. Also, Gentile nobles in feudal Eastern Europe gave Hasidic leaders the ability to collect taxes from a population that resented taxes levied upon them. In return for this collaboration, they gained a portion of the revenue and were protected from the masses by the nobility's militias. Their ability to, if you will, game the system was enhanced in 1867, when the Hungarian parliament gave all Jews civil and political rights, equal to those held by other Hungarians. Ironically, that reform gave the deeply religious Hasids greater access to the corridors of secular power. Long-standing rules or ordinances could be broken if they were seen as negatively affecting their distinctive way of life. I'll now move into the roots of Satmar Hasidism. By the late 19th century, Hasidism had become deeply factionalized as new courts or extended family communities were established around a new generation emerging, a new generation of charismatic rabbis. One of these was founded in Satmar, a city of Jews and Christians in Romania near the Hungarian border, and culturally Hungarian. Its founder was a dynamic young rabbi named Joel Teitelbaum, who was born in 1887, who had already built up a large following in his native northeastern Hungary. He was elected chief rabbi of Satmar in 1928 and began to cozy up to the Romanian government authorities, including the king, in hopes of gaining their political support and protection. Nevertheless, their deliberate self-segregation removed them from much of society and paradoxically only contributed to outsiders seeing them as alien. Not surprisingly, with the Nazi conquest, many Hasids became prime victims of the Holocaust, as they were so easily identifiable by their unique patterns of behavior and distinctive dress. In 1944, the Nazis tightened their rule in areas of dense Hasidic residence. They had not really moved into Hungary and into Slovakia in any meaningful way up until 1944. This is something I only recently discovered, that those areas, Jews living in those areas were not as harassed and as tortured and sent to concentration camps as Jews, say, in Poland. By 1944, the Polish Jewish population had been devastated as a result of the Holocaust, but it came relatively late to Hungary. But in 1944, by around March or April of 1944, the Nazis tightened their rule in areas of dense Hasidic residence, and many Jews were now being sent to the concentration camps for extermination. An ardent Zionist group succeeded in negotiating with Adolf Eichmann for the transport of a small number of Jews to freedom in Switzerland. Though already a fervent anti-Zionist, Satmar leader Rabbi Teitelbaum was able to raise some of the ransom to include a number of his following on what came to be called the Kastner train to Geneva. Rudolf Kastner was an ardent Zionist of Jewish ancestry, very well-educated person, and had already been known for years as a political fixer. He had always been an effective interceptor between Jewish communities and ruling non-Jewish elites. And Kastner was able to work with Eichmann and two of his chief associates to find a way of freeing some of the most prominent Jews. And through a series of negotiations, a price was agreed upon. This was a huge ransom that had to be paid for this so-called train that was going to take Jews out of Hungary and to freedom in Switzerland. And so Katzner was a key player in what was called the Rescue Group, which was a organization based in Budapest. Now, Teitelbaum, by this time, was certainly well known as a vehement anti-Zionist. There's no question about that. And what's so interesting is that Katzner and his family were great believers in the formation of the State of Israel. But Katzner saw the train as a kind of Noah's Ark. Katzner was going to take what he felt were very important Jewish people, leaders in their fields. And when I say fields, I mean not just in religious and theology, chief rabbis, but doctors, attorneys, farmers, pharmacists, teachers, a broad swath of society. But the question is, and it still remains unanswered, why would the